That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
Testimony began just one day after the biggest event in human history. In Nashville, the Gourley trial was taking over the conversation.
Yes, indeed.
People were obsessed. Rumors flying at the dinner tables and Bell Mead and everywhere in Nashville. Every word went into both the Tennessean and the Nashville Banner every day. The people from the press were like paparazzi. They were trying to get pictures of Mr. Gourley's son Billy, who's very handsome, his wife very attractive, and that Bill Powell's family. He had a teenage girl and boy. The people in the Powell account were insistent that a deacon in the Presbyterian church, seemingly the nicest man, could never do something like this.
The second week of trial started with Bill Powell taking the stand in his own defense.
He should have gotten an Oscar or an Emmy. I guess he had practiced what he was going to say, and they had thrown every question or every curveball to him that they could, and he always had the right answer for them.
The right answers and the right attorney.
I took the role of an underdog from the beginning.
Listen to Jack Norman Sr. talk about using the prosecution's witnesses to benefit his client.
In order to show why, as they claim, Powell would want to kill Gourley, they had to use some very prominent witnesses. Well, I was able to get from these very widely respected businessmen, I had them to give Powell a splendid reputation for truth and veracity, and I drew it long out of them. Whenever you can draw something beneficial to a defendant out of state witnesses, it is much stronger in your favor than it is when you have some testimony of the defendant's witnesses. I will have to say that I got some awfully lucky breaks in the case.
An eyewitness had been neutralized by crafty cross-examination. Now, prosecutors stood ready to introduce what looked to be the murder weapon.
R.C. Jackson was a patrolman with the Metro Police. On Sunday night, during the trial, right before the third week, he had been at a fish fry. And he heard people at the table talking about a gun that had been found on Elm Hill Pike a year before. In '68, August of '68.
The man at the fish fry telling that gun story happened to work in the auto business as well, at a rival Chevy dealership, Jim Reed.
So R.C. Jackson went and found this man. They went and got the gun and turned it into the police, the gun with the pearl handles. The police traced the gun when they got it. They traced it all the way back to this man named Bob Frensley. And so I was sitting there in the courtroom, and Bob Frensley was on the stand, and Mr. Hooker asked him, well, what do you do? And he said, I have a Ford dealership in Louisville, Kentucky. And he said, well, where did you work before that? And he said, Capital Chevrolet. And everyone went, oh. There were a lot of the, oh. Anyway, so the day of the murder, Bob Frensley was still at Capital Chevrolet then, and he went directly to the hospital. He said, Bill, what did you do with the gun I gave you? And he said, somebody stole it out of my car or something. Frensley went back the next day and said, Bill, will you tell me what did happen to that gun? And he said, well, I lent it to a friend and never got it back. So Bill Powell got out of the hospital, and Frensley went back a third time. And he said, Bill, you've got to tell me what happened to that gun. And Powell said, don't ask me anymore. He got furious. I told the police I didn't know anything about a gun, so don't ever ask me about it again.
And this was no ordinary gun. Frensley said he had modified it with those pearl handles.
Because the handle was rough wood, he bought these 2 grips, pearl grips.
After Bob Frensley testified that he'd given Bill Powell a gun, they put Bill Powell back on the stand. He said, I never owned a gun. It was the same caliber gun. When it was found, it was too late. The barrel was corroded, and even the FBI could not prove that that was the gun. It was not admitted into the testimony. So,
The closest thing to a proverbial smoking gun had backfired.
The rules of procedure and evidence were not as strict as they are now. We never, as a prosecutor, you never knew who's going to be an expert witness. You didn't have to disclose who's going to be your expert. A lot of these trials were trials by ambush. They developed an acute ability, like an animal hunting in the woods. I mean, they learned how to hunt in these woods, and they were good at it.
The defense continued to play a masterful legal chess game.
I had the impression at the time that it was Jack Norman, Sr., who was well known and had this thunderous voice. And he was very rude. Every prosecution witness who got on the stand, he swiveled his chair around and didn't have his back to him. It was just a rude gesture, meant to intimidate, I'm sure. Mr. Hooker was maybe past his prime. He was more of a civil case lawyer anyway, and Jack Norman was a criminal lawyer. And Cecil Brandstetter was just the most brilliant courtroom performer. I mean, he wasn't dramatic like Mr. Hooker and Mr. Norman, but he was just drilling and chilling the way he treated the witnesses for the prosecution.
I don't know that I don't like murder cases. I'd never had at that point a murder case as such.
It was also the very first trial for Hal Hardin, who would go on to become U.S. Attorney and a judge.
This is the last of the great old trials, and I want to be a part of it. First trial. First trial. And I told somebody, I said, I've already tried the trial of the century or participated in it, and I don't need to do anything else.
After 20 days of testimony, a jury sequestered for 3 weeks, the defense opted to forego a closing argument, denying the great John Hooker a final chance at the jury.
We didn't get to hear Mr. Hooker give his final argument. And I'm going to tell you, I did get to hear it several times, both before and after the trial, and I'm telling you, he was great.
In the end, you can argue that race again reared its head. Bill Powell had blamed this crime on an unknown black man. Then the judge had some curious instructions for the jury.
Judge Cornelius, when he charged the jury, he told them they would have to weigh the evidence and they would have to decide if Walter Lee Davis, who had served time in the penitentiary, was a credible witness. He never cited anyone else, like, did you believe so-and-so? I mean, you'll have to think if you believe so-and-so. No, it was only Walter Lee Davis.
Well, I can remember one lady walked in and had a smile on her face as she looked at Bill Powell. I went, oh no, this is, you know, this isn't good. The media people that covered the trial had taken a poll. I can remember one of them telling me, Billy, we think he'll probably get 40 years. And then the jury walks in hours later and says, not guilty. I was floored.
We got on the elevator. Mr. Norman was a friend of mine. He looked at me, put his hand on my shoulder. I'll never forget it. He said, son, don't take this personal. This is not personal. The jury, his peers have spoken. And that's what we live by.
I think that the fascination with this case after 55 years is because no one ever really was sure. It's an American story of maybe greed and deceit, and it pathos involving Billy. This was not just a murder and the taking of Mr. Gourley's life and depriving his family of a beloved father and husband, but he got the business, their livelihood.
I've been asked that. Billy, have you forgiven Bill Powell? Of course, the Bible says you're supposed to. Well, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I have not been able to forgive him.
Here's another first from Capital Chevrolet. Capital now honors all major credit cards. Yes, your credit card is now good for parts and service at Capital Chevrolet. So let Capital's all-American performance team put your car in the pink of condition and follow the highway in a smooth-running Capital Chevrolet.